Hi, my name is Nora Gelprin. I'm the Director of Sexuality Education and Training at Advocates for Youth. Thanks for joining me to review climate setting when teaching sex education. So, what is climate setting? We know it's really around setting the tone and the context to prime your learners for effective instruction. It's super important when it comes to sexuality education. We know that oftentimes our students walk into the classroom really uncomfortable, very anxious. A lot of them have never had exposure to learning about sexuality, and even those that are super excited about it often have a tendency to share way too much in the classroom. We know it can be really helpful to set the climate because it can increase rapport between you and your learners. It can also help to build trust between students. We also know that it can really create clear expectations for how students can behave in the classroom and how those behaviors will be managed. We also know that you can use your physical space, even just how you set up your classroom, your desks, and your chairs to create more safety for your learners, and it gives you more credibility as the educator. So, what can we do? There's some pretty basic techniques that most sexuality educators find are super helpful with instruction. I'm going to go over some of them in greater detail in just a minute, but let me list them here now. The first and foremost is to create and maintain ground rules, then to find effective icebreakers, warm up activities to make sure to address the issues of your students walking in without a lot of comfort. Also, to provide an opportunity for students to anonymously or privately share their gender pronouns, and then to ensure using those for the rest of your time together, to create a parking lot and to make sure to manage all of the issues that come up when you're teaching effectively. And lastly, to give trigger warnings because we know that there are many students that have experienced and survived trauma, and some of the topics that we may cover could bring up really scary feelings or re traumatize students if we don't give them a warning about that and give them a chance to create a safety plan. So let's revisit ground rules. You may not call them ground rules, you may call them different kinds of things, but really it's a way to establish a set of expectations between the teacher or the educator and the learners so that everybody feels it's a safe and productive environment. So here's a sampling of some different kinds of ground rules. You may use some of these, all of these, or have a list all your own, but we find many of these are super helpful when creating a safe learning environment. It can help to talk through what they mean one at a time. And there's lots of different ways that you can create this list with your students. Some ways you can do that are to do something as simple as brainstorm them together at the start of your class or your unit. You could come in with a list of them if you don't have a lot of time and just review them with your students and make sure they agree with them. You could do something more playful like play Pictionary or charades and have others act them out. And we know once you create the ground rules, they're only as effective as they are enforced or utilized when you're actually teaching. If they're just hanging on a piece of paper on the side of the room and no one ever looks at them again, they don't really help you as an educator. So, ways that you can make sure that they serve you well, or you can keep them posted in the class so they're just a visual reference while you're teaching. It can also help to review them periodically, or maybe as you're addressing a particularly sensitive topic. You can also make an observation when a particular student or maybe the whole group has forgotten a ground rule, and you can revisit them. It can also really help to have the class decide what a consequence would be as opposed to you as the educator. So you can step out of that role of being disciplinarian, and your students will take over more ownership of their own learning environment. Let's also revisit introductions and how important those are. Something as simple as having your students pronounce their names and the preferred names they would like to be called versus those you're given on the roster can be really, really helpful. Also, to provide students with an anonymous and voluntary way to share their gender pronouns can be really helpful so that you don't misgender anyone by mistake. You can use something like simple having the students share one unique thing about themselves. Maybe they can pair up and do an interview with another student and then introduce each other, or find a fun name game that you can use on the first day of class or the first time that you're all meeting. All of those are great ways to start to get to know your students and have them get to know each other. Lastly, it's really important to figure out a way to use a parking lot, which can be a simple piece of paper or a section of your whiteboard where you devote space to parking items as they come up, questions you don't have a chance to answer, or maybe don't know the answer to, or issues you want to explore more or find out more information and bring it back to them. What is important is that you do need to follow up on each of these items, if only to refer students to maybe someone else that would be a better resource or have a more informed answer. That could be the school counselor, a health healthcare provider, or even someone like a parent or a caregiver. It also can give you a time to check in with your supervisor. Sometimes we get asked questions and we're not sure whether we can answer them, whether it's appropriate for us to answer them at the grade level that we're teaching. So it can give you a way to check in with someone else to make sure that what you're doing in the classroom follows your curriculum guidelines and your district and state policies. So just to review, we talked about the importance of setting climates when teaching sexuality education in order to maximize learning. We talked about that there are lots of strategies that you can use. In particular, we focused on these three: using ground rules, the importance of learning names and using the appropriate names, and then also ways to use a parking lot. I hope this has been a helpful review for you. Thanks so much for joining us.